You were born with individual strengths and a unique purpose. Don't let fears, false beliefs, or life's happenings diminish your influence. It's time to live and lead for impact. Host Kirsten Ross, expert of transformation, will help you defeat the drama and overcome the trauma that can stop you in your tracks. You'll gain focus, find confidence, and take bold action. Unleash passionate, purposeful you. Let's go.
Welcome to Live and Lead for Impact. I'm Kirsten Ross, your host, and this is episode 237. And I am so proud to say that this podcast is a part of the Impact Academy. And I can't wait to lock arms with you there. And I'll give a little bit more information in a bit. But in the meantime, I want to introduce an amazing guest. Her name is Margy Feldhuhn, and she's a podcast host and co-owner and CEO of Interview Connections, the first and leading podcast booking agency. She and her business partner lead an in-house staff of over 25 full-time employees in their now virtual Rhode Island office and have successfully scaled the agency to multiple seven figures. In addition to being an entrepreneur, Margy is also an animal rescue advocate and personal development enthusiast. With her podcast, We Get It, Your Dad Died, Margy uses her own experiences of losing her dad to suicide to transform the conversation around grief and show the joy that is possible on the other side of loss. Her show won first prize in the Best Podcast category of the 2021 Rhode Island International Film Festival. So Margy, welcome. Thank you for joining me. Congratulations. And wow, as I'm reading your intro and thinking about how you have used what must have been a very, very difficult time as a catalyst to really serve others. I just want to say thank you for that.
Oh, thank you so much, Kirsten. And thank you for having me.
Yeah. So we are going to dive in and, I don't know what you're going to have to choose, like what you're talking most about, Interview Connections or your awesome podcast where I know that you're helping others through grief. So tell me about, probably the two paths your work is on and what impact are you really working to make in the world?
Yeah, thank you so much. So it is kind of two paths, but they definitely relate to each other. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs find this where at first your focus is very much on building a business, generating revenue, hitting those sales goals. And that's still very much a focus and growing a team and improving our company culture all the time, which I know you're an expert at. And so that is very much a part of it. And I've also found that as the business grows, and all of us who own businesses know that in order to grow the business, you have to grow as a person, and every new level the business hits, you hit a new level in your own personal development. So they very much play into each other. And it was about the 7-figure mark where I really started wanting to have a bigger impact outside of the success that the business was seeing in, telling my story, helping others to get through something that might be similar to what I'd gone through. And this is something that we see a lot with entrepreneurs who are established. They build a great business. They know what they're doing, but then they get this like nagging feeling of that I want something more though. I've like made this money. I've made these sales. I figured this out. But what is my legacy? What's the impact that I'm having? How am I serving and helping others? So, and that's why I love podcast guesting so much in Interview Connections, because when we book entrepreneurs on podcasts, they're able to share their story. And so they are growing their core business, but they're also having such an impact. And I'm a big believer in the power of sharing your story to change lives.
Oh, I love that. And really the focus on this podcast and my work in my business is helping people make their impact. And it's why I always ask, I'll be asking you in a minute, but I want to hear the backstory of why they're doing what they're doing, because that's so important and can be inspiring to others who are listening. It's not about the dollars and all that. Yes, that gives you, credibility. And of course we want to be successful and if we're not making money, we can't keep doing our important work because we do need food and a roof over our heads, et cetera. But But really what's inspiring and motivating to me is the stories that people share. And also, I love that, so often when we go through tough times, those can be the catalyst to us kind of having that shift or transformation in our life. And if we can flip the switch and use those tough times, not only as a catalyst for ourselves, but as a way of sharing with others, now we have transformed something that can be negative and yucky and given it that positive spin.
Yeah, absolutely. I was so excited to go on your show because I love how much you talk about transformation. We are also really transformation focused, the transformation of sharing, the transformation that others have on hearing you, how transformative it is to grow your business and grow as a person. And our core value actually of our business is to transform the lives of entrepreneurs through transforming their business with visibility and strategy. So I love the transformation focus that you have too.
Oh, always. I mean, yeah. And I'm, look out because you're kind of talking about some of my my excite button things. So I'm going to try not to head down long paths. But yes, one of the things that I love about my work is too often, we live in the world of assumption, or we have fears or false beliefs. Some people like to call them limiting beliefs, but I love alliteration. So fears and false beliefs. But those stand in the way. And on the other side, if our serving of others is helping them remove those, man, there is just joy. And I can't tell you the number of times I'm brought to tears because I get to play this tiny little part in someone else's journey to, busting the fear of taking the action or moving through a really difficult conversation that they're so afraid of. And FYI, side note, rarely, if ever, are those conversations as difficult as they fear they will be. But on the other side is, big stuff. So I just have to say that. So I love that. So tell me about the life experiences that have motivated you to work towards making this impact, helping others.
Yeah, there's this shift that happens. And I really have found myself throughout my life, like wanting someone to know what I was going through or to be a leader. So like, I just remember even as a kid, it's so funny. Like, hey, I wish there was someone talking about this stuff. I wish there was someone who could show me how to navigate this. And then the shift after losing my dad, and I think the shift that everybody can have is you can be that person. Like you can be the person that you wanted, that you wished you had. And it's so fulfilling to be that for others. And I love that you're talking about difficult conversations because the further I've gotten into the business, into growing my impact and creating content that helps people and changes people, I have really realized how much your energy is affected, and not just like your woo-woo energy, which I do love that stuff, but truly your energy, how tired you are. And I found that in certain phases in the business, I was exhausted because I either wasn't doing the work that I knew on a core level I needed to be doing in the world, or I was avoiding something. And usually it was those conversations, those hard conversations. And I was so tired that I'm like Googling, like, how do you know if you have Lyme disease? Like it was to that point, and having that breakthrough of seeing how even small, hard conversations you're avoiding or small ways you're not stepping into what you should be doing physically can exhaust you.
Oh my gosh, 100%. I mean, if we step and I just can't help but dive into this a little more because yes, I do so much focus on what is giving me energy or zapping my energy, but also where am I placing my energy and my time and my creative juice. And so if we are avoiding those tough conversations, think about it. We are, whatever it is that you are either assuming or not requesting or, asking to clarify, whatever that trip up is that is causing you to need to have the conversation, that roadblock is still there. One, so you're still dealing with that inefficiency and effectiveness. Two, the emotion of unresolved stuff, whatever it is. Three, you are using energy and your creative juice to come up with excuses about why you're not doing that, because we don't just like fess up often, at least my clients don't. they tell me they didn't have time or, just a million different excuses. I love that I can still find humor in human nature. We are such funny creatures, but yeah, like just think about all of that. And our focus is on the not instead of what we get to do on the other side of it. And so anyway, yes, it is so energy zapping. And that's what I love. And I will tell you, I've been facilitating tough conversations for around 30 years. And I always hesitate quickly, like, is there one where it went poorly? No. Is it always like exactly what we want? No, but I help create like really realistic expectations because, our relationships are a journey. You might not resolve all the things in that first conversation, but just, maybe at least just being heard or getting it out or confidently speaking or reading through something that you've prepared. All of that helps. But I really do think that I can confidently say that the thing that the person was fearing most has never come to fruition by diving through the conversation. And on the other side has always been better stuff, whether it's relief, a reshift in focus, feeling more empowered, courageous, celebrating, all those kinds of great things. And ideally, healthier, more vulnerable, authentic relationships.
I love that so much. And I think the thing about tough conversations that trips people up and that makes having someone like you so valuable is entrepreneurs love like a shiny object one-off, like one big breakthrough. And the thing about tough conversations, and I'll speak for myself as well, that I think trips us up is it has to be a recurring breakthrough. It's never a box you check because you face that, you have that tough conversation, but then there's more, right? They keep happening. And some of them are really small, like little things that you don't say to just keep the peace, but that stuff really adds up. So I love that you do that. And it was similar for me. I mean, I talked so much about losing my dad and we were really close. And that really was such a catalyst, such a pivotal moment. I transformed. I'm a different person because that happened. And it had so much to do with my entrepreneurial journey and the way I created my life from there and being in business and everything that I used to grow the business. In many ways, I got out of that experience. And also, it's not like you have one big breakthrough experience like that and it's a box you check, right? Like those hard conversations, you have to continue to invest in your personal growth and continuing to learn about yourself and evolve. You never get to that point where you're like, okay, I had this big profound moment and now I'm like perfect. You're always going to be a human. And like you said, humans are ridiculous. Like no matter how evolved you are, you're still going to have thoughts like ego thoughts and stuff like that are just truly ridiculous. And it's good to be able to see how funny it is.
Oh, absolutely. I couldn't do the work that I do unless I found humor for sure. And of course, letting go because I'm not in control of, I can provide the path, but I can't make them go down the path. But, and sometimes it takes way longer than I wish it would. But I tell you, you're like just this last week I had, and it's a family business and I particularly love working in family businesses because just that unique dynamic. I mean, they have cemented relationships and buttons and all those kinds of things from the start. And now, I say like when family and business collide, it can really, ignite that friction and being able to help them just maneuver through these difficult conversations, get to decisions, see what they've been doing in the past, but like we're dropping that. And it just brings joy. And I tell you, as you talked about like the small steps, that's one of the big trip ups that people make when they're thinking or planning or avoiding the tough conversations. Again, they're putting the full weight of, I either need to resolve all of this in this one conversation, oh my gosh, how am I going to do that? But like, if you can take the weight of all that off and just say, no, my goal is to say it, or initiate the conversation, and the other part's out of your control, like how the person reacts or, what happens from there. So like set those smaller goals and don't put the weight of thinking like everything gets fixed. And it doesn't need to be. Life is a journey. And so just start with those smaller expectations. Again, start with those and you'll probably bust through those and do even better. But at least you're setting yourself up with some realistic expectations and not this full weight of, oh my gosh, I have to fix it in a 15-20 minute conversation. So tell me a little bit more about, you shared a lot about the transformation that you made after going through this very difficult time. What were some of the strategies that you used to kind of flip that switch and shift it from something so tragic to really a transformation?
Yeah. I mean, I think part of it that makes it so powerful is when something falls apart that feels so solid, like losing someone really close to you, or what everyone went through, at the beginning of COVID, when all these things got canceled that had seemed uncancelable, you really realize how much that's an illusion. The way that things are, the structure, like, oh, I couldn't possibly do that, or it's always like this. When something big falls apart, suddenly there's no framework. You have that open space where you could create everything, which is not to say that it's not terrible. Like the grief is so profound. When you lose anything, but especially losing someone who's such a foundational piece of your life and who you are, and you don't realize how much you have your future created in your head with that person, that it's just an assumption. It just happens so quickly. You envision all these life milestones, and it's a given that that person is there. And when they're suddenly gone so quickly, and in my case with a suicide, it was so fast. I mean, no warning, everything falls apart. And there's something really powerful and beautiful when everything falls apart, especially for someone like me, who is like a high achieving control freak. It really put me into this sort of free fall where I had to relinquish control because there was nothing left to control. It had just fallen apart. And through that, I was able to rebuild. It really showed me how resilient I was, because if you had asked me, could I have handled this situation before, I would have been like, oh, absolutely not. And that's something that people do when they picture a big loss. They always think, oh, no, I couldn't possibly handle that. But people do tend to be a lot more resilient than they think they will, and more able to find joy even after terrible things than they think they will. So what happened for me is I had been really lost for most of my life. I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I wanted to have like a career and achieve success. I had been, like a high achieving A student, but I felt very lost when I left school because I didn't have any clarity on what I wanted to do. And when I lost my dad, I was living in Asia as an English teacher, which was not something I wanted to do long term. I just loved to travel and I wanted to live in Asia. So I got a teaching job, and I went home after my dad died, and my parents were hoarders. So there was this hoarded house that is like another aspect of this, where the house had always been this seemingly like Mount Everest, impossible thing that I hated a house that stressed me out so much. Like I just felt like I couldn't breathe in there. And like growing up in that environment was really hard. And I had a lot of like mental health issues that were partially a result of just being in such a chaotic, cluttered environment with no space to like breathe or be creative. And so when he died, I went home and I cleaned the house. And it took 5 months of working all day, every day. I was up at like 5 a.m. and I would just like collapse at like 8 p.m. every day for 5 months. And I had never had the motivation before to focus that intently on one big goal or project. But because I didn't really have a choice, and I wanted to take care of my mom, and I wanted to create a house that was livable for her after what had happened to my dad, I did it, and it changed the way I saw myself and what I was capable of. And I really think of the house clean as my first business, because it was seemingly impossible goals, a seemingly impossible 5-month timeline. So many experts told me I couldn't do it. They told me I shouldn't try. I had to learn to hire a team. I needed so many different types of professionals to come in and help me. And I had never owned a home. I did not know how to like find plumbers and find handymen and find cleaners and find, I found a hoarding expert, which was amazing. And it took a lot of research and interviewing people. So I really learned so much from accomplishing that task and getting that done. And then I had to learn a second harder lesson, which was that I hadn't processed my trauma from losing my dad and all the past unresolved trauma that got kicked up from that. So I achieved this incredible goal with the house, and then things started to unravel in my personal life because I hadn't dealt with the trauma. So then that was like the second layer of that lesson of getting into therapy and really taking trauma processing seriously. So not just doing personal development like meditation and reading books, but like hiring a professional to help walk me through this PTSD and this trauma. And that really was the journey that led me to the business that I own was founded by my co-owner, Jessica Rhodes. And I started out as a contractor of that business in 2016 because I wanted to work from home. I wanted freedom. I knew I wanted to own an online business and I was trying out different things. And I started working for her. We had worked together before as a contractor. I became the first employee in 2017. And that year of 2017, we truly rebuilt the business. It had been a totally different model. The pricing was different. The offerings were different. It was a fully contractor run. We had no employees. And in 2017, we got rid of all the contractors. We hired in-state employees. We totally changed. It was sort of like a new business. And because I had done all this work after my dad died with processing my trauma and doing the house and all of this, I was really a perfect first employee for a startup because I was like, you couldn't phase me. And like anything that happened, I was so resilient and I was so into problem solving because I had just solved so many problems with the house that it was really exciting. And it was a way to channel what I had learned that I loved and was really good at with the house into something that was less depressing, that was like positive of growth and creation and making this business. And I realized how much I loved business. So I was able to translate what I learned after my dad died into growing a successful business and a team really quickly. And at the end of 2017, at my 1-year review, I negotiated 50% equity and got it. And I'm now the CEO because I brought those skills that I had learned into the business. And so much of it was about the trauma processing and the personal development. It wasn't just those hard skills. I think people forget how important it is to process your trauma and deal with your stuff because that is what impacts the results that you're getting as a leader.
Wow. So Margy, I wish you could see me right now. We're only doing audio, but I was literally just shaking my head up and down the whole time you're talking. And, we were talking about energy a little bit ago and, as dealing with teens, sometimes that's de-energizing. But what I was envisioning, and wow, is a hoarding house like the perfect illustration really of sometimes like the physical aspect of stuff of junk can stop us and zap our energy. But the fact that you just powered through that roadblock first. And again, you kept talking about the problem solving and the learning. Like those are all the things that our amygdala, our little lizard brain does not like, but where the power is. And so you had this horrendous catalyst, but that put you first into having to move through this physical activity of, and I'm just feeling the energy of the weight, like as the weight of the physicalness of that hoarding house moving off of you, energy releasing, and then from the inside, the next work that you had to do. And I just, again, the visual of that, the two pieces that are both so important, and the fact that, yes, there's so many transferable skills into business as entrepreneurs, because we have to figure out the things and we have to move through roadblock after roadblock. Like there will be roadblocks, there will be things to figure out. And so I love that was your catalyst. That is so inspiring that, that this is what you have done with that experience, and that you continue to have a voice that serves others through both your podcast and then helping people get onto great podcasts.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah. And when I tell the story, I don't want people to think that it was just like my dad died and I was just like this superhero. Grief is very messy. There were so many dark moments. And I think it's important to be transparent about that. It was a very imperfect journey. And that's part of why I have my show now, We Get It, Your Dad Died, where I interview high achieving 7-figure entrepreneurs about a significant loss, because I think it's important to show that these highly successful people first of all, they're not perfect, right? We really dive into what it was like in the aftermath, but also there have been some themes throughout the conversations, which have been so interesting to me. And I would say the biggest differentiator I've seen between these high achievers and people who maybe their grief is a catalyst for something negative in their lives, they just go downhill after that, which can absolutely happen. The biggest thing that I've seen these people do, it has to do with the meaning that they create out of the loss. That is so much of it. A loss, it's not inherently, yes, it's incredibly painful, but they see that it's not inherently good or bad, that they have the power to create meaning out of it, to make it a positive, to create it as something that is a catalyst for them to serve others and help others. And through that meaning making of serving others, that is how they're able to thrive and do so well. And I think that's such an important thing to know.
Yes. And again, I'm shaking my head up and down. So, so hard. One of my favorite words is tenacity. And as entrepreneurs and to find success, you have to have tenacity. And I love that you're making that distinction because it's so true. So often people look at successful people or people who do try to stay positive. Again, you can't, it's not about stuffing feelings or not acknowledging the yuck that we go through, but it is a choice. It doesn't, none of our lives are just full of nothing but sunshine and butterflies. And I have two distinct, difficult challenges that I went through. And one was the death of my mother when I was 23. I was in grad school and it happened very suddenly. It was an illness, but we only knew she was sick for 3 days. And, so when you were talking about the grief and the recalibration of future expectations, the eventually getting married and, my mom wasn't there to help me pick my music, just all that stuff, like the layers of grief and the process that you go through, grieving just the initial loss and the shock. And as the shock wears off, feeling those next feelings and then working through those, the now feelings and then the future feelings. And then really the catalyst to me starting my business was getting out of an abusive marriage. And, so that's not the most optimal time to start a business or do self-exploration. And talking about like moving out of a difficult thing, like I was at a point because I'd been in this relationship where I was torn down daily for years. My visual that I always have is there was a little place over my heart that still knew that I was a valuable human and that I was intelligent and I did have value to offer to others. And I really, the visual I have is that I had to grab a hold and claw my way back out. And that takes tenacity and healing and courage. And again, I don't say that to, I'm not sitting here tooting my own horn, but I think realizing that people that go out and make a difference, it's not, they're not making a bigger difference because it's been the simple journey. They are shifting and clicking that switch of how they're reacting to a difficult situation. And one of my biggest, still one of my proudest moments after that was years later. I've been out of that marriage for like over 15 years now, but one of my proudest achievements is I love speaking, obviously, and had been speaking for years, but I didn't speak about my personal stuff. And a domestic abuse shelter asked me to come and speak at one of their events to about 400 people. And I was shaking in my boots because I didn't want to do it. And I just had this sense of what if I get there and I tell my story and everyone says, so what? Because I was constantly told I was drama queen. But on the way there, I had that sense of the transformation that was happening in me, the courage that, I was busting through that fear of doing it. And it became a very validating time as well. And I also was able to help others because they had done a newspaper article and women who were currently in difficult relationships showed up and were attached to a place that could help them. And so, move through the stuff. But that is the one thing that's in our control, what we do with these tough times.
That is so incredible. Thank you so much for sharing that. That is amazing. And wow. And it's so, I see so many parallels in our stories and in the other stories I've heard from high performers. I think that's so powerful. And the other thing I found, when you go for it, right, it's so hard to take this step, to take this leap, for you to like leave the marriage, to clean the house, whatever it is, even to have those hard conversations that we were talking about. But when you get in action and you have that tenacity and you just take the first step and do it, I found that you get some type of help. And it doesn't, you don't have to be religious or anything, it could be the universe or whatever. But once you get into action, it's almost like there's this momentum, this energy that starts supporting you and helping you move forward. So I think when people think about the prospect of leaving, an abusive marriage or of taking on something so big, it's so overwhelming because they're thinking about all the steps they'll have to do alone. And what they should realize is, what they could realize that would empower them is that once they take the first few steps against, and it is hard resistance in the beginning, that resistance starts to lighten up and they build that momentum. And then suddenly you are sort of being carried along on this current in the right direction.
I love that you're talking about that. Yeah, I remember. And of course, I did not do what I did without professional help, also trying all the things to get over the PTSD, et cetera. But one of the counselors that I saw while I was still in the marriage and like on that precipice of knowing it was time, but afraid to take that next step. I loved this visual she had me do, and maybe this will be helpful for others, but she said, instead of focusing on all these steps and the fear and, cause you're totally heading into a path of unknown. I felt like it was like going down one of those ice chutes. You don't know where it's going after the fact. You just start and like, oh my gosh, what next? But she said, what would it feel like, or how could you visualize going up and over all that stuff, the transition time, and plop yourself visually on the other side of it? And then what does that feel like? And that was so helpful, because again, we can get caught up in all the things and the unknowns and the uncertainty. But ultimately, if instead we can think about the goal, the vision of what we're working towards, and knowing that each of those little steps, while we don't know the path and all the steps that are going to be there, if we can instead though focus on that endpoint, that big vision, the prize, and then just take the other stuff one step at a time.
I love that. Yes. Focusing on that end. That's so smart, because there's so many little things, but when you're really focused on this end and the feelings of that, stuff comes together. Those little things get taken care of in between. So that's such great advice. And I love that you point out professional help. That is so important. And all of the most successful people I know have a lot of professional help in a lot of different areas. And I think that's really important, because people feel like they have to do so much alone, or if they can't figure something out by themselves or overcome something by themselves, that they're not doing well enough or they're not good enough. And the more I get to know these successful 7, 8, 9-figure business owners, it's amazing to see the team, and not just their employees, but like the team of people they have supporting them, from therapists to mindset coaches to strategy business coaches. Like, it's so much help. So seeking out that help is a sign of power, not a sign of weakness. And I love that you're talking about that.
Yeah. And when we visualize people who we say like, oh my gosh, I could never achieve that, or look what they've done, we're not having a realistic vision of what it's taken, from the professional support and all that they've done. So yeah, they're using professional support, and they're working through the tough things. So when you stop and think, and again, we can talk about your podcast or the business that you've grown, which is amazing. I love to have people share an impact. Like, what comes to mind when I say, what is a specific impact that you've helped someone else achieve that really fuels your passion? Because that passion helps give us that tenacity to move through the roadblocks. So what's one story that really fires you up?
That's such a good question. It's so hard to pick just one. I think I'll do one for the podcast and one for the business. For the podcast, it was the day that the first season of the show launched. And I was really nervous. I wasn't really sure how it would be received. I was like, is this too weird for people? Because it's like a show about death. And I remember that morning, I just started to get messages, and people were thanking me and saying that they were crying and that it was so cathartic and that they felt like they weren't alone for the first time since they had suffered this loss. And that was just so powerful to hear from people that it had made a difference for them and that it had healed them. And the show, I really see the show as a space for healing now. And so that I would say that day, and getting all those DMs from so many different people. And it's so funny when you have a podcast, because like I'm sharing it on the business channels, but also on my personal ones. So it's like, people from all different walks of life reaching out, some of whom I didn't even know they had lost someone, people I know, who I've known since I was younger, who live in the same town as me, people who I know from all random ways and so many different ages and a really diverse group of people reaching out, saying how much it meant to them to have this space created for these conversations, these real conversations about loss. So that was huge. And then for the business, and really similar, when we hear from our clients what an impact it has had on them to be able to share their story. And when we start working with them at the beginning of the year, seeing the difference from how they are and how they show up and how they talk about their vision and their business and their impact at the beginning versus a year later after doing 4 interviews a month, every single month, they just stand differently. They speak differently. It's a really powerful thing to see, that transformation that happens when you're courageous enough to get visible consistently and share your story on podcasts in this kind of long form conversational way. It's really incredible the way it transforms entrepreneurs and the way it transforms their businesses.
That's awesome. Yeah, I love the vulnerability of getting your story out, but also just it helps, I think, we have to become more self-aware if we're going to be vulnerable and share. And it helps us organize our thoughts and our learnings, especially when we're wired to serve. And you're probably the same. I don't just feel like I know. Every experience I go through, I'm constantly like, okay, what did I learn from this? And then how am I going to simplify? Like, that's one of my gifts, simplify it so that I can share it with others, so that it can help others. Like, I even think about like the beginning of COVID. I was having fears, just like so many of us. Amygdalas were just, flying all over the place with all this change happening at once. And I ended up, out of a need for myself, ended up making this just 1-page form to simplify, getting clear about what were the different kinds of fears that I was experiencing: financial, physical, health, and for who, myself, my son, who was it and what kind? Because from there, now I can say, like, what's in my control about this and what isn't. And I'm going to stop perseverating on the parts that aren't in my control. And then I'm going to use my creativity to figure out where can I get in action about what is in my control. So instead of being in swirling fear, let's create a really simple way. So anyway, that's just one illustration of when I go through things, I try to like simplify it and find a way for me to maneuver through it. And then I share it with others.
I love that. Yeah. Simplifying is definitely helpful, and everything you can do to like calm that nervous system, whether like whatever works for you, whether it's taking a walk or doing yoga or meditating, that is so, so important so that you're not in fight or flight, freaking out, spiraling on all these different things.
Yeah. But I love that you're helping people get their voice out, which is so empowering. And again, just, inspiring them to, if you're going to be on the podcast, just get clear about your messaging, which always helps. Like, no swirling thoughts. Try to be organized. So yes. You are sharing so much inspiration. I love it. I'm feeling so energized by our conversation. I just so appreciate it. Tell me, how do you specifically, I know you've kind of peppered through a lot of answers to this question, but how do you stay motivated? What are your intentional strategies to stay motivated and moving during tough times that you experience now?
Yes. So part of it is just the stuff that I build in every day, no matter what. So like meditating every morning. I really like Insight Timer for like guided meditations. It's a free app. So that is big because that stuff I do every day, no matter what, that's sort of like laying the foundation so that when inevitably things do go wrong, whether it's something externally going wrong, that is troubling or stressful, or just those natural bad days that we all have, working in daily meditation is huge for me because it allows me things just don't hit quite as hard when you're doing that work consistently. So yes, there might be something that is a big hit to motivation. Something goes really wrong, but you've been pre-paving your mind and your resilience with that practice. So that I would say that's part of it. And then the other thing is really focusing on the goal, just like you were talking about, of like, where are we really getting to? And what is that feeling? Like focusing on that feeling. I really love manifestation and focusing on what do I want to happen? Because so often we're so good at focusing on what we're afraid might happen and switching that. And this has been a process and I still default to worrying. And then I'm like, nope, what do you want to happen? But focusing on how I want things to turn out really does seem to create results in a great way. And that helps keep me motivated. And then the other thing I would say is sometimes loss of motivation is good information. There are certain projects that I have lost motivation on and they felt like such a slog and they were draining my energy. And I didn't quit them as fast as I should have because I wanted to power through. I didn't want to be a quitter. So I think it's important to look at lack of motivation and see, is this a mindset issue that I need to overcome either with a coach or with something else? Or is this a sign that this is not in alignment with my bigger vision and purpose?
Yeah, that's great. Well, and the other thing I'll throw in there, because I love delegation, is this something, it is not in my strengths. It's still important to the business or to what I have going on, but it's not in my core. And so let me find that person who would just be thrilled to work on this thing and let me delegate well so that we can hit the ground running and that, then you can be in your area of genius, as they call it.
Yes, that is such a good one. We are obsessed with who, not how at Interview Connections. And I am not an implementer at all. So sometimes I will feel that like drain and lack of motivation. And I'm like, oops, I did not hand this off fast enough to the who should be implementing this because it is not me.
Yeah. So, and I've been sharing my 6 simple steps of great delegation for years because there are leaders who struggle with, they say like, oh, well, I hand it off, but then it just lands back on my lap. You're missing one of the 6 little steps that you need to follow, and you can transform that team follow through.
Yeah.
So, and look at that is what increases our circle of influence, and makes work and life so much more fun. We get to stay in our area of expertise and in our gifting. So thank you so much for that. So final question. What words of wisdom do you have for others who are working to make their own impact, whether they're just starting or they're getting to those next levels?
I think my biggest piece of advice is it's such an inside job. And I know that has been said many times over in many different forms, but not just focusing on the external, but putting even, I would say, the majority of focus internally. Like, what is your internal landscape and what steps do you need to take to improve it? Whether that is working with a professional therapist to neutralize trauma and PTSD, whether that's working with a coach, really look at what do you need to become the person who can accomplish this rather than looking at how can I accomplish this?
I love that. And I always say that's the good news or the bad news, depending on how you choose to look at it. I mean, the good news is, mindset, that's within my control. Yes. Of course, it's not always as easy as we wish, and that also, while we're empowered, we can't go into victim mode. So
Yes.
So that's the good news or the bad news, however you want to look at it. And I say choose to be the empowered. Yay. I love that it's in my control.
Yes. Yeah. The biggest part is not the work for the personal development. It's the being able to actually face the honest, raw truth of what's going on in your mental landscape without justifying it to yourself or to others and really facing it. And once you can do that, it very much falls into place.
Absolutely. So thank you so much, Margy. I love that we got to connect today. As we finish today's episode, please, how can people reach out to you? Both of your websites.
Yes. Thank you so much, Kirsten. So my show is called We Get It, Your Dad Died, and it is available on all podcast player platforms. And then for interview connections, for anybody who's interested in learning more about being a guest on podcasts and growing your business and having a bigger impact that way, we have an incredible free training that is all about our 3-part framework for how you actually consistently do interviews and monetize them. And you can find that at monetizethemictraining.com.
Awesome. Take advantage of that. Being on podcast is amazing. And this is free training. So absolutely go to that link right now. And you'll find the link on today's show notes. You can go to defeatthedrama.com, click on the podcast tab, and then find episode 237 and all the information to connect with Margy and her amazing podcast. And also interview connections will be right there for you. So absolutely take advantage of that. And I want to also say that you can find the link to the Impact Academy, which is the home to Live and Lead for Impact, this podcast. And the Academy will have, it has tons of valuable information that will be at your fingertips, nicely organized for ready reference. Everything from videos and audios and PDF downloads, time with me in group strategy and coaching sessions. And you can get a 14-day free trial by going to myimpactacademy.com/join. And I would absolutely love to lock arms with you there to help you remove whatever stands in the way of you making your bigger, bolder impact. So thanks again, Margy, for joining me. This has been amazing. And thanks for giving me so much energy for the rest of my day.
Thank you so much, Kirsten.